On a sunny afternoon, an 8-year-old girl was walking peacefully when she saw her 7-year-old friend collapse unconscious on the sidewalk. Without a second's hesitation, she carried him in her arms and ran desperately for several blocks to the nearest hospital, crying out through the corridors, "Help! A doctor, please!" However, upon arrival, she was met with looks of suspicion and prejudice from the medical staff, who assumed that the poor girl had caused the injuries of the well-dressed boy. What she didn't know was that she was saving the life of the son of one of the most powerful men in the city. The next morning, 4 luxury cars stopped in front of her humble home. The Tuesday afternoon sun painted the asphalt with a lazy, golden glow, a mild warmth that promised the end of another school day. For 8-year-old Lena, the walk home was a sacred ritual. Every crack in the sidewalk was a river to be leaped over, every iron gate a fortress to be inspected. Her backpack, mended with a piece of floral fabric by her mom, bounced on her back, a loyal companion in her daily small adventures. It was in this scene of childhood tranquility that her world stopped. A few feet ahead of her, Leo, her new 7-year-old friend, stumbled. His shoes, always so shiny they seemed to laugh at the street dust, tripped over thin air. Lena frowned, thinking it was a new game, perhaps an imitation of a dizzy pirate, but then he fell. Not like a child who stumbles and braces for impact, but like a rag doll whose strings were suddenly cut. The dull thud of his body on the concrete echoed in the quiet street, a terribly wrong sound. Lena's heart pounded, beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. She ran the few steps that separated them, fear chilling her veins. "Leo!" she called, her voice a frightened whisper. He didn't respond. His eyes were closed. His face, usually rosy and full of life, had a waxy pallor. A strand of his blonde hair fell across his forehead, motionless. 2 weeks ago, their lives, once as separate as oil and water, had intersected. He, waiting for the chauffeur-driven car that would take him to the elite private school across town. She, at the simple public school bus stop in their neighborhood. He spoke of his expensive toys, of trips, and of his father's enormous office, a place where big money played. She spoke of the neighbor's cat, of her mom's sweet corn cake, and how fun it was to blow bubbles in the backyard. Despite the immense difference in their worlds, a pure friendship blossomed, watered by laughter and whispered secrets as they waited. Now, this friend lay fallen, helpless. Lena's initial panic began to transform into a fierce urgency. She looked around. The street was deserted, no one to help. A terrible, cold thought crossed her mind. What if they thought it was her, the poor girl, in worn clothes, next to the well-dressed, unconscious boy? Insecurity, a monster that always lurked in a dark corner of her mind, snarled at her. But then she looked at Leo's pale face, and loyalty screamed louder. He was her friend, and friends are not abandoned. With an effort that made her small muscles protest, she knelt and tried to lift him. He was heavier than he looked. His backpack, full of thick books, added extra weight. With a groan, she managed to get one arm under his back and the other under his knees. Staggering, she rose, Leo's small body an overwhelming weight in her 8-year-old arms. The hospital was several blocks away, a walk that seemed like an impossible marathon. But she took the first step, then the second, her face contorted with determination and effort. Each step was a battle. Her arms trembled, her breath came in painful gasps. The world around her became a blur of houses and trees. Her only focus was the hospital. Finally, the automatic glass doors of the emergency room slid open for her. Exhausted, sweaty, and with eyes full of desperate tears, she almost collapsed onto the slick, shiny floor. A nurse in an immaculate white uniform rushed towards her, her face a mask of shock and alarm. Lena opened her mouth to ask for help, to explain, but the woman's words hit her like a cold slap, cutting through the air and her last thread of hope. "My God, what did you do to him?" The nurse's words hung in the sterile hospital air, sharp and cruel. "What did you do to him?" Wasn't a question, it was an accusation. For an instant, Lena felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. The weight of Leo in her arms suddenly became unbearable, not from physical effort, but from the weight of guilt the woman placed upon her. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. How could she explain the urgency, the panic, the pure friendship that propelled her for endless blocks? Before the cold, judgmental gaze of that woman, her courage crumbled, turning into dust of fear and insecurity. Other professionals quickly approached, their expressions a mix of professional concern and veiled suspicion. Firm but impersonal hands took Leo from her arms. The loss of contact was a shock, leaving her empty and trembling. They placed him on a stretcher that appeared as if by magic and took him into a swinging door room, speaking in quick, technical language she didn't understand. A second nurse, older and with a severe look, turned to Lena. "Come here, girl. Sit here and don't move." She pointed to a blue plastic chair in a corner, away from the action, as if Lena were a piece of evidence to be isolated. The hospital, once a beacon of hope, now seemed like a prison. The fluorescent lights buzzed, merciless, illuminating every stain on her simple dress, every scuff on her worn shoes. She watched the doctors and nurses move with calculated efficiency, and she noticed how they looked at Leo's clothes, at his brand-name shoes. They saw the evident wealth in every fiber of his attire and then looked at her, the poor, disheveled girl. The conclusion in their eyes was clear and devastating. The girl from the poor neighborhood had hurt the rich boy. The social chasm between them had never seemed so vast and insurmountable. A doctor with thin-rimmed glasses approached. He didn't sit, speaking down to her, which made her feel even smaller. "What's your name? Where are his parents? Do you know their phone number?" The questions came like shots. Lena shook her head, unable to answer everything. I don't know the number," she stammered. "He fell. He just fell." The doctor stared at her for a long moment, his skepticism a glass wall between them. Fell by himself. The implication was venomous. He walked away, speaking quietly with the severe nurse, who gave Lena another disapproving look. Despair began to bubble in her chest. What if no one believed her? What if they called her mom and told her she had done something terrible? Her mom, who already worked so hard, who worried so much. Shame and fear were a bitter bile in her throat. She was alone, judged and terrified. A burly security guard appeared and stood a discreet distance away, but his presence was a palpable threat. They were treating her like a criminal. The tears she held back so fiercely finally escaped, tracing silent paths down her dirty face. In that moment, she regretted not helping Leo, but entering that place that saw her as trash. Just as the severe nurse approached again, probably to take her to a room to wait for the police, a faint but clear sound came from the emergency room, a groan, followed by a single word, a weak and desperate call that cut through the hospital's hum: Lena. The name echoed through the emergency area, faint but unmistakable. Lena? For a second, everything froze. The severe nurse, who was already moving towards Lena with a grim purpose, stopped mid-step, her mouth slightly open. The doctor, who was giving instructions to a colleague, sharply turned his head towards the room from which the sound had come. The security guard, previously a statue of intimidation, blinked, the certainty on his face dissolving into confusion. For Lena, hearing her name was like emerging from deep, dark waters. It was proof, confirmation, the truth. An instinct stronger than fear propelled her forward. She rose from the plastic chair and ran towards the swinging doors before anyone could stop her. "Wait there," said the nurse, but her voice no longer held the same authority. Lena pushed the door open and entered. The scene hit her hard. Leo lay on an elevated bed, thin wires connected to his chest and a small tube in his arm. His eyes were half open, clouded with confusion, but focused on her. "Lena," he whispered again, his small hand reaching out to her. Without hesitation, she approached and took his hand. It was cold. "I'm here, Leo," she said, her voice choked but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." A visible relief passed over the boy's face, and his fingers squeezed hers with surprising strength. The doctor and nurse entered the room right behind her, their expressions now completely transformed. Suspicion had been replaced by silent astonishment. They saw the boy's hand holding hers, the way his eyes never left her. The connection between the two children was undeniable, a simple and powerful truth that disarmed any prejudice. The doctor approached slowly, the tone of his voice now gentle, almost apologetic. "Lena, you're his friend, aren't you? Tell us what happened, slowly." With Leo's hand in hers, Lena's courage returned. She told everything, her voice still trembling but clear. She spoke of their friendship at the bus stop, how he suddenly fell, the weight of him in her arms, and the fear she felt. While she spoke, another nurse rummaged through Leo's leather backpack for identification. She pulled out a pencil case that probably cost more than Lena's family's weekly groceries, and finally found a school ID. "Hillsview Academy," she read aloud, and a respectful silence fell over the room. Everyone there knew the reputation of that school, a bastion for the children of the elite, whose tuition fees were astronomical. "His last name is Kingston," the nurse continued, eyes wide. "Arthur Kingston. His father must be the owner of Kingston Capital." The name hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Kingston Capital wasn't just a company. It was an empire, a dominant force in the business world, with investments ranging from technology to luxury real estate, a conglomerate that managed an incalculable fortune. The severe nurse swallowed hard, her face pale. The treatment they had given to the little savior of the heir to one of the country's greatest fortunes suddenly seemed like a catastrophic error. The atmosphere changed instantly. The medical staff, previously just professional, now moved with a nervous urgency, treating Leo not just as a patient, but as a precious jewel. Lena felt the change, the sudden deference in the air, and a new kind of fear, colder and subtler, began to settle in. What would Leo's father, such a powerful man, think of her? A girl whose only valuable possession was loyalty to a friend. She squeezed Leo's hand tighter, as if he could protect her from the world that was about to invade theirs. It was then that the reception phone rang, and the hum of activity transformed into a silent frenzy. The receptionist spoke in a hurried whisper, eyes fixed on the emergency room door. Seconds later, a nurse rushed into the room. Her face flushed. "They're here," she announced, her voice full of frightened reverence. "Mr. Kingston is coming up." The name Mr. Kingston had an electric effect on the hospital staff. It was as if the arrival of royalty had been announced. Doctors adjusted their lab coats, nurses smoothed their uniforms, and a tense silence, heavy with expectation, filled the air. Lena, still holding Leo's hand, felt a wave of intimidation. Her friend's father wasn't just a rich man, he was a force, a name that made people bow. The idea of facing him was scarier than carrying Leo for blocks. The emergency room door opened with a gentle but firm push, and Arthur Kingston entered. He was exactly as Lena imagined a powerful man would be, tall, with broad shoulders that filled his impeccably tailored suit. His hair was dark, with a few silver strands at his temples, and his face held an expression of absolute control, though his grey eyes were clouded with concern. Behind him, two equally serious-looking men followed, likely assistants or security. Arthur Kingston's eyes swept the room, absorbing every detail in a fraction of a second. He saw the medical equipment, the nervous expressions of the staff, and finally, his gaze fell upon his son in the hospital bed. A crack appeared in his steel facade. The concern in his eyes deepened into raw, paternal fear. He moved quickly to the side of the bed, his imposing presence making everyone else in the room instinctively recoil. He touched Leo's forehead with a tenderness that contrasted violently with his appearance. "Leo, son, I'm here." It was only then that Arthur Kingston seemed to notice the other presence beside his son. His eyes followed Leo's arm to the small hand that held it firmly, Lena's hand. He looked up, and for the first time, his grey eyes met hers. Lena felt her breath catch in her throat. He examined her from head to toe, noticing her faded dress, her scratched knees, and her frightened expression. She expected to see the same disdain or suspicion she had seen on the first nurse's face, but instead she found only a silent question. The chief doctor, sensing the need to fill the silence, stepped forward. "Mr. Kingston, I'm Dr. Evans. Your son arrived unconscious. We're still running tests, but it appears to be a severe syncopal episode. This girl, she brought him in." The doctor gestured towards Lena, his voice carefully neutral. Arthur Kingston didn't look away from Lena. He seemed to be processing the information, connecting the image of that fragile child with the fact that his son was alive and receiving care. "You brought him in?" he asked, his voice grave and resonant, not an accusation, but a request for confirmation. Lena merely nodded, unable to speak. He turned to his team, the two men waiting at the door. "Check the hospital perimeter security cameras. I want to see exactly how my son arrived here." The order was given in a low tone, but with unquestionable authority. One of the men nodded and left immediately. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Lena wanted to let go of Leo's hand and disappear, run back to the familiar safety of her street and her home. But Leo's hand, even in his sleep, still held hers tightly, anchoring her to that frightening place. A week passed, a week of silence and uncertainty. Lena heard nothing more. She went to school, returned home, but a piece of her mind was always at the hospital. Until, one Wednesday afternoon, the normalcy of her street was broken. 4 black cars, so shiny they looked like puddles of fresh paint, slid down the dusty street and lined up in front of her modest house. Neighbors peeked through windows, curtains rustling with curiosity. The door of the first car opened, and the same imposing man from the hospital, Arthur Kingston, stepped out. He looked at the small house with its peeling paint and rusty iron gate. Then he walked towards the door and knocked, the sound echoing like a proclamation. Lena, who was doing her homework at the kitchen table, froze. Her mom, wiping her hands on a dish towel, went to answer, her face a mix of confusion and apprehension. When she opened the door and saw the man in his expensive suit, with his aura of power and wealth, she was speechless. Arthur Kingston looked at the simple woman before him, then at the wide-eyed girl peeking from behind her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but charged with an intensity that made the air vibrate. "I'm looking for Lena, the girl who saved my son's life." Arthur Kingston's declaration hung in the air of the simple living room, as out of place as the luxury cars parked on the dirt street. Lena's mother, Helena Ramirez, looked from the imposing man at the door to her daughter, the confusion on her face giving way to stunned amazement. "My Lena," she whispered, as if her daughter's name in such a grand sentence were a mistake. Arthur Kingston offered a small nod, his eyes still fixed on Lena, who now hid partially behind her mother's skirt. "Yes, your name is Lena, correct?" Lena nodded shyly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't know what to expect. A reprimand? A belated accusation? I didn't do anything," she murmured, the old insecurity wrapping around her like a cold blanket. "I just helped him." Arthur Kingston's expression softened, and an emotion Lena couldn't identify. Perhaps gratitude, perhaps relief, passed through his grey eyes. "You did more than help," he said, his voice grave and sincere. "The doctor said every second counted. My son's condition is rare and serious. If you hadn't acted so quickly, he might not be with us." The words hit Helena hard. She pulled Lena closer, a protective arm around her daughter's shoulders. The idea that her little girl had carried such a heavy burden, both literal and figurative, filled her with an overwhelming mix of pride and fear. Arthur Kingston noticed the woman's emotion, and his tone became gentler. "I didn't come to frighten you. I came to thank you." One of his assistants, who waited silently behind him, stepped forward, holding two things. One was a bouquet of flowers so large and exuberant it looked like an entire garden. White lilies, peach roses, and delicate orchids cascaded in a riot of colors and perfumes. The other was a thick white envelope. "This is for you, Lena," said Mr. Kingston, indicating the flowers. "And this is for your family." He handed the envelope to Helena. Her hands trembled as she took it. Inside, there was a gift card for the largest supermarket chain in town. The value printed on the card made her gasp. $1,000 for Helena, who pinched every penny just to put food on the table. That amount was more than a gift. It was a miracle. It represented months of relief, the ability to fill the pantry without anxiety, perhaps even buy a new pair of shoes for Lena. Tears welled up in Helena's eyes. "Sir, I can't accept. My daughter did what any decent person would do." "And that's exactly why you must accept," Arthur Kingston replied firmly. "Decency should be rewarded, especially in a world that often forgets it. Please, consider this a small token of my immense gratitude." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. With a heart overflowing, Helena nodded, unable to formulate words. The gesture, the generosity, was so overwhelming it left her breathless. The business magnate, the man whose fortune was the subject of magazines, was in her humble living room, thanking her daughter. The contrast was dizzying. Lena, on the other hand, looked at the bouquet. She had never seen such beautiful flowers up close. They were perfect, almost unreal. But beneath the admiration, an uncomfortable feeling stirred. That gift, that money, seemed to draw an even thicker line between her world and Leo's. Was it a payment, a thank you that also served as a final period? She looked at Mr. Kingston, trying to decipher his expression. He was grateful, yes, but there was also a calculated distance in him, the efficiency of a man accustomed to solving problems with his capital. He thanked, he rewarded, and the matter would be closed. Was that how things worked in his world? Would her and Leo's friendship just be a transaction completed? As he prepared to leave, leaving behind the perfume of the flowers and the weight of the money, Lena felt a pang in her chest. Her family's relief was palpable, but for her, the visit felt like a goodbye. Just as Mr. Kingston was turning to leave, he stopped as if remembering something. He turned to Helena. "Your full name, please." Helena Ramirez," she responded, surprised. He typed the name into his smartphone. A small wrinkle formed between his brows. He looked at Helena with a new intensity, an expression of shocking recognition on his face. "Helena Ramirez," he repeated slowly. "You work on the night cleaning crew at the Orion Tower, don't you?" Arthur Kingston's question fell like a stone into the silence of the small room. Helena froze, the gift card still in her hands, suddenly heavy as lead. How could that man, a titan of the financial world, know where she worked? The Orion Tower was the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Kingston Capital, a universe distant from her life. She was just one of dozens of cleaning staff, an anonymous figure who moved through the empty silent corridors long after the executives in their expensive shoes had gone home. To be noticed by the owner of the empire was unthinkable and terrifying. "Yes, that's me," she confirmed, her voice a thread. A million fears flashed through her mind. Had she done something wrong, left a stain on an expensive carpet, broken something without realizing it? For people like her, the attention of the powerful rarely meant anything good. Arthur Kingston observed her, the expression of shock on his face gradually transforming into something akin to wonder. The coincidence was so improbable it bordered on the absurd. The woman who kept his offices immaculate, the invisible employee he had likely crossed paths with in the lobby without ever registering, was the mother of the girl who had saved his only son. For a moment, the power dynamic between them reversed. He was no longer just the generous benefactor. He was the boss, and she, the employee, and that complicated everything. "It's a small world indeed," he murmured, putting away his phone. The visit, already extraordinary, now had an additional layer of complexity. He said his goodbyes with renewed formality and left, leaving Helena and Lena in a state of shock. The neighbors, still peeking, saw the departure of the luxury cars as the end of an inexplicable spectacle. For Helena, however, the anxiety was just beginning. In the following days, the news spread like wildfire at Lena's school. Not the details, but the distorted and cruel version that children are so capable of creating. Lena, the rich boy's friend. She saved him just to get money. Whispers followed her through the hallways, during recess in the lunch line. Children who were once her friends now looked at her with a mix of envy and resentment. The bullying began subtly, an accidental push in line. A nasty nickname whispered loud enough for her to hear, "Gold Digger." The leader of the group was a girl named Chloe, whose parents had recently lost their jobs and who saw Lena as an easy target for her own frustration. "So, fortune hunter," she sneered one day, blocking Lena's path on the way out of school. "How much did you get for that kid? Was it a good investment?" Lena felt her face burn. "It wasn't like that," she tried to explain. "He's my friend," Chloe laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "Friend, he doesn't even go here. You two have nothing in common. You just want his money. My mom said people like you will do anything to get ahead." The words hit her with the force of a punch. People like you. It was the same judgment she had seen in the nurse's eyes, now coming from someone her own age. The pure and simple friendship she had with Leo was being tainted, twisted into something ugly and calculating. She began to isolate herself, eating her lunch alone, avoiding the places where Chloe and her group usually hung out. The weight of the secret and the shame was constant. At home, the situation wasn't better. A week after Mr. Kingston's visit, Helena arrived home from work earlier than usual. Her face was pale and her eyes red. She sat heavily in the kitchen chair, her body slumped in defeat. "What's wrong?" "Mom," Lena asked, fear chilling her stomach. Helena looked at her daughter, her lips trembling. "They fired me," she said, her voice broken. "Tonight, my supervisor called me into his office, said they were restructuring the team, but I know that's not it." She buried her face in her hands. "They didn't even give me a reason, Lena. Just, your services are no longer needed. After 5 years, without a single complaint." The news was devastating. Helena's job was the family's only source of income, the fragile pillar that supported them. Without it, there was no way to pay the rent, the bills, the food. The $1,000 gift card, which had seemed like a fortune, suddenly became a desperately small emergency fund. Lena felt an overwhelming wave of guilt. All of this started when she helped Leo Mr. Kingston's visit, the discovery that her mum worked for him. It couldn't be a coincidence. The attention of the most powerful man in town, instead of being a blessing, had become a curse. They had stood out, become visible, and in the world of the powerful, visibility for the humble was dangerous. She looked out the window at the dark street, feeling trapped in a web she didn't understand. Atop the gleaming Orion Tower, in a glass-walled conference room, 2 executives toasted with expensive whiskey. "To restructuring," one of them said with a satisfied smile. Kingston needed a reminder. No cleaning lady is going to get special treatment just because her daughter got lucky. Helena spent her days looking for work, returning home increasingly disheartened, her face marked by rejection. Lena watched her mother, her heart aching with guilt. The connection that had seemed like a miracle now revealed itself as a cruel trap. She had inadvertently put a target on her mother's back. The bullying at school also intensified. Chloe and her group were now bolder, stealing her lunch, hiding her backpack, spreading rumors that Lena's mother had been fired for theft. Each day was an ordeal, and Lena's loneliness deepened. She missed Leo, the simplicity of their conversations at the bus stop, but the idea of seeing him now was tainted by the chaos their friendship had caused. How could she play with him, knowing that her mom was unemployed because of his father? The situation seemed hopeless, a dead end of suffering. On a rainy afternoon, almost 2 weeks after Helena's dismissal, the doorbell rang. Lena, who was watching the rain stream down the window, felt a chill of premonition. Helena went to answer, her face tired and apprehensive. At the door, holding a black umbrella that barely protected him from the storm, stood Arthur Kingston. This time, he wasn't in his business suit, but in casual clothes that still seemed to cost more than a year's rent for their house. His expression wasn't that of the controlling magnate, but that of a worried and confused father. "Ms. Ramirez, Lena," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk for a moment?" Helena hesitated, but let him in. He stopped in the middle of the small room, his size and energy seeming to shrink the space. "Leo isn't well," he said bluntly. "He's recovered physically, but he's not the same. He's quiet, sad. He barely eats, doesn't want to play. The only thing he asks for is Lena." Lena's heart gave a painful leap. She imagined Leo alone in his enormous room, waiting for a friend who didn't appear. Guilt stabbed her again, from a different direction. "He calls you his heroine," Mr. Kingston continued, looking directly at Lena. "The doctors say he developed a very strong emotional bond with you during the trauma. They think seeing you would help him recover completely." Helena hardened her expression. The irony was brutal. He wanted her daughter's help to heal his son, while her own family was falling apart because of his intrusion. "Mr. Kingston," she began, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands, "I appreciate your concern, but I don't think it's a good idea." "Mom!" Lena protested, shocked. "Why?" Arthur asked, genuinely confused. It was then that Helena, propelled by weeks of accumulated fear and despair, let everything spill out. "Because ever since you appeared in our lives, everything has turned into a disaster. Lena is bullied at school every day. They call her a gold digger. And I lost my job at your company a week after your visit. No reason, no explanation. You come here with your gifts and your gratitude, but what you really brought us was trouble." The room fell into absolute silence, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the roof. Arthur Kingston stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "You were fired?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "When?" "Almost 2 weeks ago. They told me it was restructuring." He pulled out his cell phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. A muscle in his jaw twitched. The facade of the worried father disappeared, replaced by that of the ruthless CEO who had built an empire. He was furious. But the anger wasn't directed at Helena. It was a cold, calculating fury directed at something within his own organization. "No one is fired from my cleaning crew without an extremely serious reason," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "And I didn't authorize any restructuring." He made a call. His voice was low, but each word was like a shard of ice. "Marcus, I want the chief operating officer and the head of HR in my office in an hour. Cancel all my meetings. And get me the termination records for the last 3 weeks. Now." He hung up, the silence in the room now charged with a different tension. He looked at Helena, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "Ms. Ramirez, I swear I knew nothing about this. Someone in my company acted without my knowledge, and I'm going to find out who." He then turned to Lena, his face softening again. "Lena, I know I've asked a lot of you, but I'm asking one more time. Please, come see Leo. He needs you." Before Lena or Helena could respond, his cell phone rang again. It was the doctor from the hospital. Arthur Kingston's expression changed from anger to pure alarm. He listened for a moment, his face paling. What do you mean the results are inconsistent? He said into the phone, his voice tense. What did you find in his blood? Arthur Kingston's question to the phone. What did you find in his blood? Hung in the air like a storm cloud. The man's face, previously pale with alarm, became a mask of cold fury and fear. He listened in silence for another minute, each second stretching the tension in the small living room to a breaking point. Lena and Helena barely dared to breathe, transformed into spectators of a drama whose scope they could barely comprehend. He hung up the call without saying goodbye, his hand trembling slightly. His eyes, when they met Lena's, were dark with a terrifying emotion. It wasn't a rare medical condition, he said, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. They found traces of a substance that shouldn't be there. They think he was being poisoned. Slowly, for weeks. The word poisoned sucked all the air from the room. Helena brought her hand to her mouth, a sound of shock escaping her lips. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The image of Leo falling on the sidewalk suddenly acquired a much more sinister tone. It wasn't an accident of nature, a fault in his body, but a deliberate act. Someone wanted to hurt Leo. Arthur Kingston's mind worked at a dizzying speed, connecting points that were previously invisible. The condition that appeared out of nowhere, the doctors without a clear diagnosis, his improvement in the hospital, away from home, away from whoever was doing this. His anger over Helena's dismissal was instantly eclipsed by a primal terror. The danger wasn't outside, it was inside, close. I need to go, he said, the urgency in his voice clear. The hospital will increase security. The police will be discreetly notified. He stopped at the door, turning to Lena with a look of desperate plea. Lena, my request now is more important than ever. Leo's emotional state is linked to his recovery. If he becomes depressed, his system gets weaker. Whoever did this may have counted on that. He didn't need to say anything else. The issue was no longer about friendship or gratitude. It was about Leo's safety. I'll go, said Lena, her voice small but firm. Helena, despite her own fears and resentments, nodded. Faced with such concrete evil, the injustices they suffered seemed smaller. A child's life was at stake. In the days that followed, Lena's life changed drastically. A discreet car, but with a serious-looking driver, picked her up from school every day and took her to the hospital. She entered through a back door, away from curious eyes, and was taken to a private room in an isolated wing. There, Leo waited. The transformation in the boy was remarkable. Lena's simple presence seemed to light a spark within him. They played board games, drew, and Lena read to him stories from her collection of fairy tales, the worn cover book that was her greatest treasure. She didn't mention the poison, her mother's dismissal, or the bullying. In that hospital room, they created a bubble of normalcy, a safe haven where they were just two children, two friends. Arthur Kingston was always there, observing from a corner, his cell phone pressed against his ear in tense, silent conversations. He seemed to have aged years in a few days, but whenever he looked at Lena and Leo laughing, a spark of relief passed through his tired eyes. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one to find out who was trying to kill his son, and another, within his own company, to expose the corruption that led to Helena's dismissal. He quickly discovered that the order had come from two high-ranking executives, men he had trusted for years. They saw the attention he was giving to the cleaning lady's family as a threat to the status quo, a sign that he was softening. Helena's dismissal was a petty act of power, a reminder of who really called the shots in the company's day-to-day operations. The discovery disgusted him. Meanwhile, the news that Lena was visiting the rich boy at the hospital every day, transported by a private car, spread through the school like poison. Chloe and her group saw this as the final confirmation of their accusations. The bullying became crueler. They graffitied Lena's desk with the words, "Gold Digger." During a physical education class, they accidentally hit her hard with a ball. Lena endured everything in silence, the weight of her secrets isolating her even further. She lived in three worlds: the hostile world of school, the tense and frightening world of the hospital, and the worried world of her home. And in all of them, she felt utterly alone. One afternoon, as she got out of the car to go into her house, she saw a man standing across the street, watching her. He wore a hat that hid his face, but she felt his gaze on her, cold and calculating. When he realized she had seen him, he turned and quickly walked away. A shiver ran through her body. He wasn't a neighbor. She had never seen him before, and something about the way he watched her wasn't curiosity. It was surveillance. The danger that had been circling Leo was beginning to spread, its shadows extending to her doorstep. The sight of the strange man across the street left Lena deeply shaken. She ran into the house, her heart pounding wildly, and locked the door behind her. It was a different fear than what she felt at school. It wasn't humiliation or loneliness, but a cold, primal terror. It was the feeling of being prey. She didn't tell her mother, not wanting to add another worry to her already heavy burden. But the image of the anonymous observer remained etched in her mind, transforming the evening shadows into potential threats. The next day, on the way to the hospital, she huddled in the back seat of the car, nervously looking out the windows, searching for the man in the hat on every corner. The driver, a man named George, who was normally silent and professional, noticed her anxiety. "Everything all right?" "Lena?" he asked, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Lena hesitated, but fear overcame her reluctance to speak. I think I saw a man watching me yesterday, near my house." George's expression instantly hardened. He didn't question her or doubt her. He picked up his earpiece and spoke in a quick, low code. The response on the other end was equally concise. Without a word to Lena, he made a detour, taking a different, longer route to the hospital. The message was clear. The threat was real, and they were taking it seriously. When they arrived, Arthur Kingston was already waiting for them at the back entrance. George spoke to him in a low voice, and the businessman's face hardened into a mask of protective fury. He knelt in front of Lena, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Lena, you did the right thing by telling George. Can you describe this man?" She tried, but the image was vague. Tall, dark coat. Hat covering his face. It wasn't enough. "Don't worry," said Arthur, his voice firm as steel. "From now on, your safety and your mother's are my priority. No one will hurt you." That same afternoon, a discreet security system was installed in Lena's house, and a second, equally discreet car began making regular rounds on her street. Helena, when informed, was terrified. The danger that had once been an abstract story about a rich man's son had knocked on her door. Their world, once small and simple, was now entangled in a dangerous conspiracy involving a fortune they could barely conceive. Her daughter's friendship with Leo had cost them a job, invited bullying, and now put their lives at risk. A part of her, the terrified mother, wanted to end everything, grab Lena and flee far away. But another part, the woman who saw her daughter's courage and loyalty, knew it was too late. They were in this together. Meanwhile, Arthur's investigation progressed on two fronts. At Kingston Capital, he confronted the two executives. They confessed, arrogant at first, believing their importance to the company would protect them. They underestimated Arthur's fury. They were not only fired, they were escorted out of the building, their careers in ruins, with the promise that he would use all his power to ensure they never worked in that sector again. The news spread like wildfire through the company. A clear warning: loyalty and decency were no longer secondary values. They were the new law. For Helena, justice came in the form of a formal apology and an offer. Not her old job back, but a supervisory position on the cleaning team, with a tripled salary and a personal request from Arthur for her to help restructure the department, ensuring fair treatment for everyone. It was a victory, but bittersweet, born of a terrible crisis. The second front of the investigation, the hunt for the poisoner, was darker. The private detectives Arthur hired worked tirelessly day and night, investigating everyone who had access to Leo. The list was long and alarming. Household staff, tutors, even distant relatives who would benefit from a tragedy. The substance used was subtle, difficult to trace, mixed into one of Leo's daily vitamin supplements. It was a meticulous, cruel plan, executed by someone very close. The tension was affecting everyone. In the hospital, Lena and Leo's bubble of security began to show cracks. Leo, though improving, was a smart child. He noticed the guards outside his door, his father's whispered conversations on the phone, the concern in Lena's eyes. "Why is everyone so serious?" he asked one day as they assembled a puzzle. "Is it because of me? Am I still sick?" Lena looked at her friend's innocent face, and her heart broke. How could she explain the evil that surrounded him? "You're getting stronger every day," she said, forcing a smile. "Everyone just wants to make sure you'll be all right." But the lie tasted bitter. Their innocence had been stolen, and no matter how many puzzles they assembled, they would never be able to put the pieces of the world back together as it was before. That night, the detectives called Arthur. They had found something. One of Leo's part-time nannies, a young woman who had always seemed sweet and dedicated, had made large cash deposits into her bank account in recent weeks. Deposits that perfectly coincided with Leo's worsening health, and the money was traced to an offshore account belonging to Arthur Kingston's younger brother, Richard, a man consumed by envy and greed who had long resented being in the shadow of his billionaire brother's success. The revelation fell upon Arthur Kingston with the weight of a concrete slab. His own brother, Richard, the smiling uncle who brought Leo the most expensive toys, who tossed him in the air and called him champ. The betrayal was so deep, so monstrous, that for a moment Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't a faceless corporate enemy or a greedy employee. It was his own flesh and blood, the envy he had always known Richard harbored for his success, for his fortune, had transformed into something murderous. The goal wasn't just the money, the inheritance. It was to erase Arthur's lineage, to eliminate his greatest treasure, his son, the living proof of a life Richard coveted and despised. The threat to Lena and her mother suddenly made terrible sense. Richard must have realized that Leo's unexpected recovery was linked to the girl. If Lena continued to strengthen Leo's spirit, Richard's plan would fail. Therefore, Lena needed to be intimidated, driven away. The man in the hat wasn't just any henchman. It was a warning, a demonstration that Richard's reach extended beyond the mansion's walls. The situation demanded a careful strategy. A public report to the police could alert Richard, giving him time to flee or destroy evidence. Arthur needed a confession, something irrefutable that would put him behind bars for a long, long time. He organized a family meeting at the mansion under the pretext of discussing Leo's health. Richard arrived with an air of feigned concern, bringing a teddy bear for the nephew he was trying to kill. The hypocrisy was nauseating. The mansion, once a home, now seemed like a stage for a tragedy. While the adults conversed in the living room, Lena was in Leo's bedroom. Their friendship had deepened, forged in the fire of that crisis. She was no longer just the girl from the bus stop. She was his confidant, his anchor in a confused world. He knew something was wrong and, in his childlike wisdom, trusted only her. That day, as they played, Leo grew quiet. He picked up one of his sketchbooks and, instead of dinosaurs or race cars, drew a small, dark figure, mixing something into a glass. Beside it, he drew a boy lying in a bed, looking sad. Uncle Richard sometimes brought me special vitamins, Leo said softly, without looking at Lena. "He said it was our secret. To make me stronger." Lena's heart froze. She knew that was important, terribly important. "He asked you not to tell anyone?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Leo nodded. "He said it was a game, a secret superhero game." Leaving Leo with a trusted nurse, Lena went downstairs. She didn't know about Arthur's plan, didn't know the confrontation was happening. She only knew she needed to tell Leo's father what she had discovered. She stopped in the hallway, listening to the voices coming from the living room. She heard Arthur talking about the investigations, his voice controlled but filled with suppressed rage. And then she heard Richard's voice, full of feigned indignation. "Are you accusing me? Your own brother? This is madness, Arthur. You're paranoid." "It's not paranoia when the evidence points to you, Richard. The money in the nanny's account, the special vitamins. That proves nothing," Richard spat, his voice rising. "The nanny could have done it herself, and you have no way to prove anything about vitamins." At that moment, Lena's small figure appeared in the living room doorway. Everyone turned to her. Richard's face paled when he saw her. "Leo told me," she said, her voice clear and firm, echoing in the tense silence. "He told me about the secret superhero game, about the vitamins that only Uncle Richard could give him." Richard's denial died on his lips. The testimony of an innocent child, delivered without malice, was more devastating than any detective's report. It was the truth, pure and simple. Richard's mask crumbled, revealing the monster underneath. In an act of desperation, he turned and ran, not towards the front door, but towards the library at the back of the house. Arthur shouted his name, but he didn't stop. There was a sound of breaking glass. Richard had leaped through the ground floor window, falling into the manicured gardens and disappearing into the darkness of the night. Now a fugitive. Richard's escape left a shocking vacuum in the mansion. The sound of broken glass echoed like the final period of an era, shattering not just a window, but the very notion of family and trust for Arthur Kingston. The silent confession in the act of fleeing was more condemning than any words. The danger, once a shadow, now had a face and a name, and was at large. Immediately, the house transformed into a fortress. Security was quadrupled. The police, now officially involved, issued an alert. Richard Kingston, the charming socialite, was now a wanted criminal, suspected of attempted murder against a child. The news shook high society circles, sending shockwaves through the business world where the Kingston name was synonymous with power and stability. For Lena, the night was a blur of serious faces, urgent conversations, and an overwhelming sense of having stumbled into a world too dark and dangerous for her. Arthur took her to a corner, away from the chaos, and knelt before her. "Lena, what you did today," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how brave you were. You gave Leo a voice. You gave us the truth." That night, for safety, Lena and Helena did not return home. They stayed in a guest wing of the mansion, a place more luxurious than any hotel they had ever imagined, but the luxury brought no comfort. Helena stayed awake all night, looking out the window at the guards patrolling the grounds, the fear for her daughter, a physical pain in her chest. Lena, exhausted, slept, but her sleep was restless, full of dreams of shadows and men in hats. In the following days, a new and strange routine settled in. Leo was discharged from the hospital, but the mansion was his new clinic. With nurses and doctors making daily visits, his friendship with Lena became the only constant in his turned-upside-down world. They spent hours in the vast garden, away from the windows, always under the watchful eyes of security. To the outside world, the story became a media scandal. "Kingston Dynasty Meltdown," blared the headlines. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. And, inevitably, Lena's name leaked. The mystery girl, the poor friend, the key piece of the scandal. The media attention brought a new kind of hell. The story was distorted, romanticized, and sensationalized. Some painted her as a hero, a guardian angel. Others, influenced by anonymous sources, likely Richard's friends, insinuated that she and her mother were opportunists who had infiltrated the Kingston family to take advantage of the situation. School became an impossible territory. Chloe's bullying was replaced by an invasive curiosity from everyone. She was no longer the gold digger, but a local celebrity, which was almost worse. People pointed at her, whispered when she passed. The normalcy of her life had been completely annihilated. And then a new obstacle arose, more insidious than the media or rumors, influenced by wealthy and prejudiced parents from Leo's school, who saw the entire situation as a scandal that could contaminate their own children. The Hillsview Academy School Board issued a formal recommendation. They advised Arthur Kingston to limit Leo's contact with external influences that might be linked to the unstable environment around him. It was coded, polished language, but the message was brutally clear. The poor girl was not welcome. They feared that friendship with someone from such a different social class, now embroiled in a criminal scandal, could be detrimental to Leo and to the school's reputation. It was social prejudice disguised as concern. Arthur was furious at the hypocrisy, but the board had power, and their suggestion planted a seed of doubt. Was he, by keeping Lena close, putting her in more danger? Was their friendship, which had saved Leo's life, now becoming too heavy a burden for an 8-year-old to carry? Lena, upon hearing of the recommendation, felt a familiar pain, the same she had felt when the nurse accused her. It was the pain of being judged not for who she was, but for where she came from. She looked at Leo, playing innocently in the garden, and a terrible decision began to form in her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe, to protect him and to protect her own family, she needed to step away. The idea was like a shard of glass in her heart. Stepping away from Leo seemed impossible, but the pressure of the world around her was becoming overwhelming. Lena's decision weighed on her like a shroud. Stepping away from Leo. The cold logic of the adult world said it was the right thing to do, to end the media scandal, to appease the elite school board, to perhaps finally restore a semblance of normalcy to her mother's life. But her heart screamed in protest. Leo was her friend. How do you abandon a friend? Especially one who has been through so much suffering. The internal struggle consumed her. She grew quiet and withdrawn, and Leo, with his keen sensitivity, noticed the change. "Are you mad at me?" he asked one day, his blue eyes filled with a concern that mirrored hers. "No, Leo, never," she replied, her voice choked. "I'm just tired." It was a half-truth. She was tired of fighting, of being judged, of being afraid. That night, she made her decision. She told her mother, who hugged her tightly, silent tears streaming down her face. Helena understood her daughter's sacrifice, the nobility in her pain. The next day, Lena asked to speak with Arthur Kingston alone. They met in the library, the same place from which Richard had fled. The broken window had been replaced, but the memory of that night still haunted the room. "I don't think I should come anymore," said Lena, the words coming out in a hurried whisper before her courage abandoned her. "It's better for Leo, for everyone." Arthur listened in silence, his face impassive, but his eyes full of deep sadness. He didn't argue. Perhaps a part of him agreed that the burden on her shoulders was too great. Saying goodbye to Leo was the hardest thing Lena had ever done. She didn't say it was goodbye forever. She said she needed to go back to school full-time, that her mom needed her at home. She invented excuses that sounded hollow even to herself. Leo didn't understand, but he felt the finality in her embrace. He clung to her, his face buried in his shoulder. "You'll come back tomorrow, right?" he asked, his voice muffled. "I'll try," she lied, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Leaving that mansion, leaving Leo behind, was like tearing a part of herself away. The silence in the car on the way home was deafening. In the following days, Lena's absence created a vacuum in Leo's life. He stopped eating again. He spent hours looking out the window, waiting for the car that never came. The light Lena had ignited in him began to dim. His recovery, which had been progressing so well, stagnated and then began to regress. The doctors were alarmed. The emotional trauma was causing physiological stress that made him vulnerable. Richard's plan, even with him at large, seemed to be coming to fruition in a different way. Meanwhile, the hunt for Richard continued. He was intelligent and had access to a considerable portion of his own wealth, which made him a dangerous fugitive. Then, a week after Lena stepped away, the unthinkable happened. An envelope arrived at the Kingston mansion. Inside, a single photo. It was of Lena, walking home from school, taken from afar, without her noticing. And a note, with letters cut from magazines: "Call off the police, or the next photo will be the last thing they see of her." Terror returned with full force. Richard wasn't just fleeing, he was hunting. He had turned Lena, his nephew's savior, into a target. In his twisted mind, she was the cause of his downfall, the piece that unraveled his perfect plan. Arthur found himself facing an impossible choice, the climax of all his suffering. Withdraw the police and let the man who tried to kill his son escape in the hope of protecting Lena, or continue the hunt and risk the life of the girl who was the only reason his son was still alive. He looked at his son, wasting away from sadness, and at the photo of the brave girl who had saved him, now marked for death. The wealth, the power, the business, none of it mattered. Two innocent children were trapped in a web of hatred woven by his own brother. The decision wasn't just his to make. He picked up the phone and called Helena. He explained the situation, his voice devoid of any arrogance, just the sound of a broken and desperate man. On the other end of the line, Helena listened, the blood chilling in her veins. The moment of greatest tension had arrived. It was no longer about prejudice, bullying, or money. It was about life and loyalty, about what one does when evil threatens to take everything you love. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, Lena's voice, small but surprisingly strong, sounded near the phone. "Don't stop looking for him." Lena's words, "Don't stop looking for him," were like a ray of clarity in the darkness of Arthur's indecision. It was the voice of pure courage, devoid of the fear that paralyzed the adults around him. In that moment, he understood that backing down would be the true defeat. Giving in to Richard's blackmail would not guarantee anyone's safety. It would only embolden a monster. The choice was made. The hunt would not only continue, but intensify. He mobilized all his resources, a vast network of contacts, and a significant portion of his capital to assist the police. Security around Lena and Helena was elevated to the maximum level. They were transferred to a safe location, a luxury apartment in a building with impenetrable security, where they would remain until Richard was captured. The first victory came from an unexpected place. While investigating Richard's finances, detectives discovered a series of suspicious transactions linked to the two executives Arthur had dismissed. It turned out that Helena's dismissal had not just been an act of petty prejudice. They were in collusion with Richard, helping him divert funds from Kingston Capital for years. Arthur's attention to the cleaning lady scared them, fearing that any internal investigation could expose their crimes. Richard had instructed them to fire her to create a problem that would distract Arthur. Confronted with evidence of fraud and conspiracy, the executives confessed everything, providing vital information about Richard's operations in exchange for a plea deal. Justice for Helena was not just the restoration of her dignity, but the exposure of deep corruption, which allowed Arthur to begin cleaning up his own house. The second victory was more personal. Shocked by the level of danger his inaction had created, Arthur Kingston attended an emergency meeting of the Hillsview Academy School Board. He did not raise his voice or make threats. Instead, he spoke with brutal honesty about prejudice, about values, and about how their recommendation had almost cost an innocent child's life and strengthened the hand of a criminal. He announced the creation of a foundation with an initial investment of millions of dollars from his personal fortune, dedicated to providing full scholarships for low-income children at Hillsview Academy and other elite schools. "A person's worth isn't in their zip code," he told the silenced board, "but in their character." And today, the character of an 8-year-old girl from a poor neighborhood shamed us all. The impact was immediate. The board, fearing a public scandal and inspired by Arthur's genuine change, not only withdrew its recommendation, but invited him to lead a new committee on inclusion and diversity. The news spread among parents, and the narrative about Lena began to change. Admiration replaced suspicion. Meanwhile, with the information from the executives, the net began to close around Richard. They tracked him to a small port, where he planned to flee the country in a rented boat with a fake passport. The capture was swift, silent, and without incident. He surrendered without a fight, his face pale and defeated, the arrogant gleam finally extinguished from his eyes. The news of Richard's arrest reached the secure apartment where Lena and Helena were. An immense relief, so great it was almost painful, flooded the room. Helena cried, hugging her daughter tightly. Lena didn't cry. She just felt the knot of fear in her stomach finally dissolve. The next day, they returned home, and for the first time in weeks, the street didn't seem threatening. The afternoon sun felt friendly. That evening, Arthur and Leo came to visit them. There were no luxury cars or assistants, just father and son. Leo, seeing Lena, ran to her, and the two friends hugged for a long time, an embrace that healed the wounds of the past weeks. Arthur watched, his eyes moist. He and Helena exchanged a look, not as boss and former employee, or as rich and poor, but as two parents whose children had survived a storm, united by a gratitude and a respect that transcended any social difference. The conflicts had been resolved, not by easy solutions, but by acts of courage and a painful re-evaluation of values. Justice prevailed, security was restored, and the path was now clear for healing. The friendship between the two children, which had been tested by prejudice, danger, and betrayal, had emerged stronger and purer than ever. 5 weeks had passed since that sunny afternoon when Lena and Leo's worlds so dramatically collided. The dust had settled, but nothing was as it was before. Autumn arrived, painting the tree leaves with shades of gold and red, a symbol of the profound transformation they had all experienced. Lena's house, once marked by fear and uncertainty, now breathed an air of newfound peace and security. Helena not only thrived in her new position at Kingston Capital, but became a respected voice, implementing programs that ensured dignified treatment and growth opportunities for the support staff, people who, like her, had been invisible for too long. Her higher salary didn't change who she was, but it gave her the freedom of not having to choose between paying rent and buying fresh groceries. A relief reflected in her more frequent smile and her less hunched shoulders. For Lena, life at school found a new balance. Chloe, the girl who had tormented her, apologized one day, an awkward and mumbled but sincere apology. The scandal and its resolution had taught many children a hard lesson about judgment and empathy. Lena was no longer a target nor a celebrity. She was just Lena, the quiet and brave girl who liked to read fairy tales. The friendship with Leo was now a natural and accepted part of her life. On weekends, the discreet car would pick her up, not for a hospital room or a mansion fortress, but for afternoons of simple play, sometimes at the mansion where they ran through the now shadow-free garden, other times in Lena's small backyard, where they taught Leo the joy of blowing bubbles with a bent wire hanger. Arthur Kingston had also changed. The ruthless businessman who measured success in profits and dividends discovered a new metric: the well-being of his community. The foundation he created wasn't just a public relations gesture, it became his passion. He began investing in social programs, in education, and in small businesses in underserved neighborhoods. He learned that true net worth wasn't in his financial assets, but in the lives he could touch. He, who almost lost his son by focusing only on his empire, rediscovered that true wealth lay in human connections, in loyalty, and in selfless courage. That bond between the two families, forged in crisis, was now his most precious asset. On a Saturday afternoon, the two families gathered for a picnic at the city park, a neutral place between their two worlds. Sitting on a plaid blanket, sharing sandwiches and juice, they were just people. Arthur, in jeans and a t-shirt, laughed as Leo tried to teach Lena how to use an expensive tech toy. Helena, relaxed and happy, chatted with him about plans for the employee holiday party. Looking at the two children laughing together, the blonde and brunette heads close, Lena reflected on the journey. The girl who only wanted to help a friend learned that authentic courage, even when the path is daunting, always finds its reward. She understood that her worth was not measured by her clothes or by the zip code she lived in, but by the strength of her heart. Leo, the child who almost lost his life to greed, discovered that heroes come in all sizes and that true friendship is a treasure that no money can buy. And Arthur, the billionaire who had everything, learned from an 8-year-old girl the most important lesson of all, that the greatest gestures of compassion and bonds of loyalty are the most profitable investment a human being can make. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The sound of children's laughter floated on the fresh air. In that perfect moment, it became clear that the story that began with a fall and an act of bravery did not end with the capture of a villain, but with the birth of something much more powerful. A family united not by blood or status, but by genuine values of love, sacrifice, and the unwavering certainty that kindness is the greatest fortune of all.